Hello all, A Knife's Tale here, bringing you another knife review, and I just bumped my light. Okay, so today we're going to be looking at the CJRB Mini Pyrite. This is a slightly different variant than the ones you can typically buy, because I got this actually with, sort of as a free gift with another knife purchase, which is kind of nice. But mine's in, yeah, D2. Where the ones you buy are typically in AA or RPM9. There is a premium variant of this knife with better steel, but also at a much higher price point. So let's jump into the real specs of this thing, because it's a tiny one. It's a 5th pocket knife, 100%. You got basically 2 1/8 of blade, 5 1/4 of handle, give or take maybe just a hair, and 3 1/8 of 3 1/8 of handle, 5 1/4 overall. I keep messing that up. I want to just jump straight to the handle. I don't think it's really necessary to make much in the way of comparisons here, because this is a very small knife. I mean, the Civivi Elementum, yeah, dwarfs it. It just does. It is both bigger, it is a bit thicker. The only thing that this thing does is actually be a little bit tiny bit taller, but it's tiny, so who cares? It is also very, very light. You're actually getting more than an ounce an inch of this thing, so yeah, great ratios. That would probably come down to the FRN handles. I think these are FRN. They're plastic. GRN, FRN, Grivery, something. And as I said with the full-size Pyrite Light, whatever CJRB is doing with their plastic, it's finished extremely well. Better than most. It feels better than most plastic handles. I'm not angry at this because it is a budget knife. It does have full steel liners that are milled out, and several pieces of hardware for stability, so there's no real flex. And overall, it just feels much better than most plastic, so take that into consideration. I know the plastic's a turnoff, but this isn't bad. If you're going to get it, at least get some good stuff. Hardware. That is a T6 bit. Where is my T8? Over here. T8 on the pivot. Well, that could have went really poorly. Okay, get my head in the game. Come on now. Don't cut your fingers off. You just started here. T8 on the body screws. T6, unfortunately, on the pocket clip. I know that for a fact. You either will never have to deal with the pocket clip, because you're not going to flip it, or if you are going to flip it, because this is a pretty ambidextrous locking mechanism. They did tap it for the left-handed carry, so you'd only really have to use it once, even in that situation, which, not ideal, but I'll forgive them, as this is about as inoffensive a use of T6 as you can get. And they're flat screws underneath that pocket clip, so no problems. But T6, still don't love that. This also looks like it's not a captured pivot. It is, even though it doesn't look it. I don't know why they did it that way, but they did. Pocket clip is deep carry with good retention, actually. It works in and out of the pocket pretty easily. I guess we should probably finish on specs before I... Okay. Before I'm... What are you doing? Okay. Before we move any further into the actual evaluation of this knife, 4 1/15. Yeah, it's thinner than the Elementum. Blade stock is 89 thousandths, so 90 thousandths. Very thin blade stock. And the blade behind the edge should be pretty darn thin. No. Okay, that was too far up. If you can hear the dog, He's made his appearance. Yes, dog, hold on you. 12 to 13 thousandths, I'm going to say, is probably where this thing sits behind. It's thin. It's an almost full flat grind. Not quite full, but an almost full flat grind with thin geometry, thin blade stock. It cuts. It's good. It's a good cutter, and it's great for the utility cuts, and that's, let's be honest, what you're going to be using this thing most with some sort of pinch grip or something like that. I should mention this is on bearings, which you should probably be able to tell. In fact, most button locks are on bearings. There's only one that I found not to be, which was a kind of weird outlier, but it happened, and that's an interesting knife in its own right. So, we have... Can I get the... Yeah, okay. The plunge grind unfortunately hits the edge. You're going to have to cut in more plunge grind after you probably a single sharpen. Don't love seeing that. You can, because the button hits way back here, which is the stop pin, so it's nowhere near the edge, but... Yeah, that plunge grind should be here. Let's be honest. Well, I mean, in an ideal world, that plunge grind would be back here, but I'd accept it here. It definitely needs to be further away from the edge. My particular example is perfectly centered. And there's no play, which is nice to see, especially on such a small knife. I mean, there's no up or down, nothing. In fact, I think that's the pivot itself moving. I don't think there's any pivot lash. Like, I think that might be like the material moving inside. I can just barely feel something, so I don't think it even qualifies as pivot lash. Which is pretty good on a tiny budget knife. Also pretty good here are the ergos. They're super neutral. I personally do not like 3-finger knives, in general, at all. So I don't typically go smaller than the Elementum. And even some 3-inch knives are 3 fingers, and I just don't like it. This knife does have a choke-up position, and I can actually get all 4 fingers in there, feel locked in, and despite being kind of almost touching this edge, I don't feel like I'm going to roll into it. Maybe once I start sharpening it, maybe if I get a really nasty edge on there, it'll be a problem, but right here, I don't feel like I'm going to roll into the edge, and I've never hurt myself. Just be conscious of it, and you should be able to put a little bit of distance in between yourself and the edge pretty easily for push cuts, but most of the time you're going to be using this knife like this, or like this, or down here. It's a draw cut, but this one has enough handle and enough ergos that even for a shallow push cut, this thing can work, which is nice. It makes it more than just one note. Deployment is where we are at now, and that's, of course, the opening hole aperture and the button, which I just failed miserably. Like 4 times in a row. Interesting. That's not that hard, people. I will say that the thumb flick is not as satisfying. You don't have a ton of leverage. I mean, you just don't have a ton of handle in your hand. So you can mess it up a little bit like that. You can get it, but the reverse flick is much more satisfying. The button is just much easier. And one thing I have to give this knife credit for is, listen here. That's a good amount of retention. It sucks itself in, it clicks into position. There's a decent amount of strength holding that in. It's pretty clicky. It's a little mushy, but that's just the nature of a plunge lock with the button. So, but overall, yeah, it's pretty satisfying. I will also mention that this knife has some button stick. Not terrible button stick, but some. Which is actually something I prefer my budget button locks to have. If there's button stick, it's just basically, as long as it's still manageable as long as it's not super strong or anything. It sort of just adds extra friction and makes for a more solid and more likely reliable lockup. This one's fine. But I do think I've noticed that when there's stick, it seems like there's less chance of any sort of completely poorly cut in plunge. And it seems to decrease the odds of disengagement or accidental disengagement. So on the budget territory, I don't mind the stick much at all. In fact, like I said, I kind of prefer it because it adds a sort of sense of safety, in my opinion. It's like I know that it's got just that little bit of extra friction holding it on. Not that it can't fail, but also on a knife this small that's going to be relatively light for light duty tasks. Even if you do have a weaker button lock, this is kind of the area where it's the least problematic because you really shouldn't be doing something that could disengage the knife with a knife of this size. So, thoughts on the CJRB mini Pyrite. Oh, and also CJRB branding here. D2, they always insist upon putting codes on a lot of their knives. I don't like that, but it's still pretty minimal here. I'm not gonna hit them at. Okay. Throat. I'm not gonna hit him for that. I'm not gonna be complaining about it, so it is what it is. And that's sort of what you get with this knife. It's a budget knife. It's normally in AR RPM 9, $43, $43.95, something like that. And being a button lock, if this was a liner lock or a frame lock or something like that, and was over the $40 mark, I wouldn't be super happy with the plastic handles and everything. But button lock, AR RPM 9, sufficient to say that $44 is pretty darn acceptable and still leaves it being pretty darn recommendable. If you like smaller knives. I don't. I wouldn't have bought this knife if I didn't get it for free, as I think I already said. It just, I'm not into knives this small. Knives that the primary grip doesn't give me that extra, not extra, just sufficiently enough handle to get a grip on. Not for me. So, while I like this and I like this knife, I do carry it in my, like a fifth pocket knife, but I don't typically carry it by itself. It's not my primary carry usually. However, I have used it and it's worked out pretty well. So who knows? But if you have blade length lulls, this is maybe something because there's not much blade length here. If you don't mind the smaller size, or even if you like it, yeah, this is a recommendable solid one. And it's definitely a reasonable budget price for it. There is a premium variant of this thing, I think, for like $173. I mean, you're getting titanium and possibly contouring and better blade steel and the whole 9 yards. I don't know if that's for me at all, but it's there for someone. So this is going to be going in the recommendable. But just know what you're getting, as with any knife, but especially one that's either super small or super large or has some unique factor about it. It doesn't necessarily mean it's for everyone, even if it is recommendably, and it is recommendably. If it is recommendable and budget, it's not as sort of universal as just that. It's like, that's just a knife. So that's it for me here. This was a pretty quick one. Not much to say about this. It works. It's inexpensive, especially when you get it for free. And CJRB is doing some interesting stuff with their plastic and button locks, I guess. Good price, at least. So, yeah, that's all. Thanks for watching. This one's been pretty much just sort of is what it is. And that's good every now and then, right? I think so. See you later. Bye for now.